The running back position has always been the most important in fantasy football, but it's all about finding the right one because if you don't, you might be doing your league's punishment. My goal today is to give you guys some analytics that I found for free to help you narrow down the board and to select the right running back on the side of statistics. But if you enjoyed today's video, drop a like and drop a comment. What running backs are you targeting in 2024? We're going to start here with the running back one curse. And if you're unfamiliar with this, basically in short, no running back has finished as the number one running back to back seasons since 2002 and 2003. So if there's any guesses for you, I'll give you a second, maybe drop it in the comments. But Priest Holmes, a guy that all the way back in the early 2000s. So this goes to show that these running backs get beat up and they can get hurt a lot easier than other positions. It's not likely that these guys repeat as the number one finishers. But let's look at some recent examples. In 2018, Todd Gurley was a fantasy gem. We loved him on our teams, and he won a lot of fantasy championships. But going into the following year, after he finished as the number one back, he dropped to 14 points a game. That is a 12-point decrease and almost a 50-point decrease on a per-game basis. In 2018, his number one year was also his last year, over 1,000 total scrimmage yards. But let's move on here. Maybe that's just an anomaly. In 2020 and 2021 for Alvin Kamara, he went from 25 fantasy points a game to 18 fantasy points per game. And even in that running back one year, when he was averaging 25 points a game, he only had 12 points in 2 total fantasy football playoff games that season. So even if you had him on your team, he was great in the regular season. He got you to the playoffs, but you weren't winning many championships with Kamara on your roster. But let's look at the last 2 years, Jonathan Taylor and Austin Ekeler. These are guys that had tremendous touchdown production in their running back one campaigns. They both went from 22 points, however, to 13 points, dropping about 9 points a game after their running back one campaigns. And that's because their touchdowns, Jonathan Taylor went from 20 to 4. Again, these are 2 years back to back. Austin Ekeler went from 18 to 6. Touchdown production can kill a running back's hopes and dreams of being the repeat finisher. But what does this mean for last year's number one? Christian McCaffrey, a guy that was head and shoulders above the field. Well, outside of health, there's not a lot of red flags here for Christian McCaffrey. He led the NFL in touches. San Francisco had the second highest rushing percentage. McCaffrey was first in yards over expected, first in receiving points per game. Everybody's coming back, including the head coaching staff, and he's just not a touchdown-dependent player like we saw Jonathan Taylor and Austin Ekeler. What happened to them? That shouldn't happen to Christian McCaffrey because this is a guy that can get it done in the receiving game as well. So everything is there for McCaffrey to repeat outside of the health department. But if you want to stay on the side of history and avoid this running back one curse, go after guys like Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson. They can do it all in the rushing game, the passing game. They've been getting hyped up all offseason by their camps. These are probably the most likely guys to be the number one finisher this season. But let's get away from those top-end guys, those guys that are going in the first round of your drafts. Let's just focus in on how to find a running back one, which means finishing top 12 at your position. And of course, this is data that's been collected since 2017. It includes 96 running backs, so a fairly large sample size. The first qualification, you got to be a young guy, 28 or younger. One of the biggest outliers in this scenario was Raheem Mostert last year, but Raheem Mostert had 18 touchdowns. 18. So he's one of those guys to look out for a big decrease in touchdown production. The second qualification, volume is king. You have to have at least 15 carries or 4 targets a game to be a running back one. And that makes a lot of sense because you need the ball to make plays to give us fantasy points for our teams. One of the biggest outliers was Tony Pollard just a few years ago. The third one is that you have to be true to home. You can't be changing teams in the offseason, whether via trade or your personal free agency decision. 94 of the 96 running backs have been true to home. The only outlier, or the most notable outlier, was James Conner, going from Pittsburgh to Arizona, and he was a magical back in 2021. But these are the most notable outliers in this scenario. But just look at Chris Carson. Chris Carson, what a special back he was. A shame that his career had to come to an early end. But these are the running backs that don't meet all three of those qualifications. A long list of names, and you see a lot of these guys have great track records behind them. So let me say this. The data doesn't back these guys. However, a lot of these guys don't fit the category because they changed teams this offseason. And this offseason was crazy. We had like 10 more running backs than normal change teams this offseason. So, usually we only have 2 or 3. This year we had about 10. So for what it's worth, from David Montgomery up, I love all these running backs in fantasy this season. You can still go out there and draft them going into next year. These are running backs that do meet all 3 qualifiers. However, of course, you see a lot of the usual suspects that meet the qualifications. And then De'Von Achane is down there on the bottom of the board. You love to see him. A lot of people are hyping him up, and for good reason. These are the guys in the middle rounds, though, however. Ken Walker, Rhamondre Stevenson, 2 top 20 running backs for me. They meet the qualifications for this category. Now, the only thing I don't understand, and this was a typo, so don't go to the comments, Jonathan Brooks shouldn't be here. Just something that I messed up on. But outside of that, Ken Walker, Rhamondre, Zamir, Najee, Javonte, who just had all the snaps in preseason, and Tyjae Spears, they meet the qualifications to be running back 1 in 2024. So hopefully this video helped you guys. And if it did, again, drop a like and drop a comment. What running backs are you going after here this fantasy football season?